What if everything you built, your success, your reputation, your empire, was built on a lie? Adrian Moretti had it all, but one shocking revelation turned his world upside down. Now, he's fighting for redemption, risking everything to make things right. But will it be enough? Or is it too late to rewrite his legacy? Stay until the end to uncover the twists, betrayals, and ultimate showdown that will change everything. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let's dive in. Adrian Moretti leaned back in his leather chair, staring at the glowing cityscape beyond his office window. His empire, Moretti's fine dining, was at its peak. Dozens of high-end restaurants, a brand name synonymous with excellence, and a reputation as one of the most powerful figures in the culinary world. But lately, something felt wrong. The restaurant business was more than just numbers and awards. It was about passion, about the love of food, about the people who made it all possible. Yet somewhere along the way, Adrian had lost that connection. He spent more time dealing with investors than he did inside his own kitchens. His staff feared him more than they admired him. Even the dishes, the very soul of his restaurants, felt like shadows of what they once were. Online, critics continued to praise Moretti's fine dining for its consistency and prestige, but the excitement, the innovation, the heart, it was fading. So he did something he hadn't done in years. He decided to go undercover. Not as a chef or a waiter, but as a customer, an ordinary guest stepping into one of his own restaurants, seeing it as the world saw it. No PR, no prepared dishes for VIPs, no carefully curated experience. Wearing a simple black hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face, Adrian stepped into Moretti's Seaside, one of his most prized locations. It was a quiet, upscale bistro overlooking the water, known for its impeccable seafood dishes and elegant ambiance. Inside, the restaurant was alive with soft music, the murmur of conversation, the clinking of wine glasses. Servers moved seamlessly between tables, their smiles well-practiced but devoid of real warmth. Adrian slid into a booth near the back, away from the main dining area, and picked up the menu. He knew every dish by heart. He had designed most of them, after all. A young waitress approached, her eyes scanning him briefly before offering a pleasant smile. "Good evening, sir. Can I start you off with something to drink?" "Water's fine," Adrian replied casually. "And give me a few minutes to look over the menu." She nodded and left. He wasn't really here to eat. He was here to listen, to observe, to feel his restaurant in its most natural state. At first, all he heard was the expected chatter of diners, compliments on the wine selection, murmured appreciation for the delicate flavors, polite laughter. But then, a different voice caught his attention. From the booth directly behind him, two hushed voices spoke in urgent whispers. "Are you sure he comes here?" one of them asked. The voice was high, anxious, like a kid not used to sneaking around. "He does," the second voice replied, firmer, more determined. "Mom said this was the place." Adrian frowned. He kept his head down, pretending to study the menu, but now his focus was entirely on the conversation behind him. "What if we get caught?" the first boy asked nervously. "We won't," the second boy snapped. "We just need to figure out who he is." A strange chill ran down Adrian's spine. Who were they talking about? His first instinct was to dismiss it. Kids looking for a local celebrity, maybe a famous chef. But something about their urgency, the weight in their words, made him listen closer. "Mom said it's his fault," the second boy muttered. "He said everything went wrong because of him." Adrian's hands gripped the menu a little tighter. The waitress returned with his water, and he forced himself to smile as she set it down. "Ready to order?" she asked. He hesitated. He wasn't hungry. Not anymore. His mind was elsewhere. I'll just have the house special." "Great choice." She jotted it down and walked away, leaving him with the voices behind him. "Mom said he ruined her life," the second boy continued. "That he took everything from her." Adrian's stomach churned. He suddenly felt exposed. as if he were no longer just an observer, but a participant in something he didn't fully understand. He glanced discreetly toward the booth behind him. The boys were young, maybe 13 or 14. One had a mop of dark curly hair under a hoodie, while the other wore a baseball cap pulled low. They looked nervous. Their hands fidgeted. Their eyes darted around the room. Who was their mother? And why did they seem so certain that he was the one who had ruined her life? The boys' voices dropped lower, making it harder to hear. Frustration twisted in Adrian's gut. He couldn't just sit here anymore. He had to know who they were talking about. But how? Confronting them directly would be reckless. If they were talking about him, revealing his identity could escalate things in ways he wasn't prepared for. But if he stayed quiet, he might never get answers. A deep breath steadied him. He stood up, casually adjusting his cap, and walked toward the front counter, pretending to check the wine selection near the kitchen. From there, he had a better vantage point. He could see the boys without them noticing him. He waved over the waitress. "Hey," he said, keeping his tone casual. "Those two boys in the back, do they come here often?" She glanced over her shoulder. "Them? No, I don't think I've seen them before. Why? Are they causing trouble?" "No, nothing like that," Adrian said quickly. "Just curious." The waitress shrugged and walked away, leaving Adrian alone with his thoughts. He turned back to the boys, now watching them more closely. "I just want to know why," the boy in the hoodie whispered. "Why he did it." "Mom never tells us the full story." The boy in the cap hesitated. What if she's wrong?" "She's not wrong," the first boy insisted. "I saw his picture. It's definitely him." Adrian's pulse spiked. They had seen his picture? His heart pounded against his ribs. He swallowed hard, his mind racing through every bad decision he had ever made, every employee he had ever wronged, every name he had ever forgotten. But none stood out. Then, the words came. Angela Rivera. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. The name hit him like a fist to the gut. Angela Rivera. It had been years since he had last heard her name, a once promising young chef, full of passion, full of talent, eager to make her mark. She had been one of his brightest protégés. And then one day she was gone. He had assumed she quit, that she couldn't handle the pressure, that she simply wasn't strong enough to survive in the high-stakes world of fine dining. But now, listening to these boys, her sons, speak with such bitterness, such conviction, had he been wrong? Had he done something he didn't even realize? Adrian felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He had come to this restaurant to reconnect with the heart of his business. Instead, he had stumbled into a ghost from his past, a ghost that wasn't willing to stay buried. And now, as he stood there, invisible yet fully exposed, he realized one thing. This night was no longer about his restaurant. It was about a reckoning, and he had no choice but to face it. Adrian's pulse quickened as he sat back down, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His mind reeled, searching for any memory that might explain why two teenagers, Angela Rivera's sons, would believe he had ruined their mother's life. Angela! The name pulled him backward through the years, back to a time when he had been a rising star in the industry, obsessed with making Moretti's fine dining a household name. He had been ruthless in his ambition, cutting ties with anyone who couldn't keep up, leaving behind a trail of discarded talent. Had Angela been one of them? He thought he had mentored her, pushed her toward greatness. But if these boys were telling the truth, if she really believed he had taken everything from her, then there was a part of the story he had never seen, and he had to find out what it was. Taking a deep breath, he stood up once more, this time walking toward the boys' table. His approach was casual, his hands sliding into his pockets to appear non-threatening, but his mind was anything but calm. The moment he stepped close, the boys stiffened. The one in the hoodie, Mateo, straightened his back, his face hardening, while the other, Lucas, fidgeted with the salt shaker, his nervous energy giving him away. "Hey," Adrian said, his voice calm but firm. "I couldn't help but overhear." Are you looking for someone? Mateo's eyes narrowed. Why do you care? Adrian hesitated for only a moment before choosing his words carefully. Because if you're looking for someone in this restaurant, I might know them. Maybe I can help. Lucas glanced at his brother, uncertainty flickering across his face, but Mateo was sharper, more suspicious. He studied Adrian's face, his eyes narrowing, and then his expression shifted. Recognition. Wait a second. Mateo leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. You look familiar. Adrian forced a small chuckle. A lot of people say that. I guess I just have one of those faces. But Mateo wasn't buying it. His breath hitched as realization dawned, and his green eyes blazed with anger. No way! His voice shook, his hands clenching into fists. It's you! You're Adrian Moretti! Lucas gasped, his face paling as he whipped his head back to Adrian. Are you serious? Is it really him? There was no point in denying it now. Adrian exhaled slowly, nodding. Yes, I'm Adrian Moretti. Mateo's chair scraped against the floor as he shot to his feet, his body rigid with fury. You ruined our mom's life! The restaurant buzzed around them, oblivious, unaware. But at that moment, Adrian felt as if the entire world had narrowed to this single confrontation. Your mom! Adrian's throat went dry. You're talking about Angela Rivera. You don't even remember her, do you? Mateo spat, his voice trembling. Adrian hesitated. I remember Angela. She worked for me. She was talented. She was more than talented, Lucas snapped. She was the best damn chef you ever had. Adrian's stomach twisted, guilt clawing at the edges of his conscience. You stole from her, Mateo interrupted, his fists clenched at his sides. You took her ideas, you used her, and then when she tried to stand up for herself, you made sure no one would hire her again. Adrian's mouth went dry. What are you talking about? Mateo's jaw tightened. She told us everything. How you made her dishes famous but never gave her credit. How when she confronted you about it, you fired her and made sure she couldn't work in any top restaurant ever again. Adrian shook his head, flashes of memories returning, but they were fractured, incomplete. That's not how I remember it. Mateo's hands trembled as he stepped closer. Then you remember wrong. Lucas looked away, his voice quieter, more hesitant. She had dreams, you know. She wanted to open her own restaurant. But every time she tried to get funding, every door was slammed in her face. Someone made sure of that. Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. Had it been him? Him? He had been ruthless back then, aggressive in business. It wasn't uncommon for him to shut down competition to protect his brand at all costs. But had he really gone so far as to destroy Angela's career? I need to talk to her, he said, his voice raw. If what she told you is true, I need to hear it from her. Mateo scoffed. Why? So you can manipulate her all over again? Adrian shook his head. No, I need to understand. Lucas hesitated, glancing at his brother. She's not here, but if you really want to know the truth, you'll have to come see her. Adrian nodded. Then I will. The rain had turned into a steady drizzle by the time Adrian arrived at the small apartment complex where Mateo and Lucas had led him. It was in a rough part of town, far from the luxury he had grown accustomed to. His chest tightened as he climbed the worn-out steps. This was the reality Angela had been living in while he had built his empire. Mateo pushed the door open. Mom, he called out. You have a visitor. Adrian stepped inside, his breath catching. The apartment was small but clean, filled with little signs of a life built from struggle. The scent of warm spices lingered in the air, and family photos lined the walls. And then he saw her. Angela Rivera sat on the worn-out couch, illuminated by the soft glow of the TV. Her once vivid auburn hair was streaked with gray, her eyes tired but still sharp, and when they met his, there was no surprise, only cold, hard resentment. "Adrian Moretti," she said, her voice like steel. "I can't say I expected to see you here." Adrian stepped closer, his voice thick. "Angela?" Her jaw tightened. "Why are you here?" I heard what your son said. I need to know. Did I really do that to you?" Angela's laugh was bitter. "You don't remember, do you?" She shook her head. "Of course you don't. People like you never do." Adrian felt like a knife had been driven into his gut. "Angela, I swear to you, I never meant to." "You never meant to?" She cut in, her voice shaking. "You took my work, my recipes, and built your name on them. Then when I finally confronted you, you blacklisted me. No one would hire me. I had to walk away from the only thing I ever loved." Adrian's heart plummeted. He had never thought about what happened to Angela after she left. Had he been so blinded by ambition that he had crushed her without even realizing it? Had he been so blinded by ambition that he had crushed her without even realizing it? "I didn't know," he whispered. "Angela, I swear." "Angela," she shook her head. "It's too late, Adrian. The damage is done." Silence filled the room, thick with old wounds and unspoken regrets. But then, Adrian took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "It's not too late," he said. "I can't change the past, but I can try to fix this now. Angela, you're an incredible chef, and I want to offer you a position at Moretti's Fine Dining with full creative control." Angela's eyes widened. For the first time, she looked uncertain, vulnerable. "You think you can just buy my forgiveness?" she whispered. "No," Adrian said softly. "I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want to give you the chance you should have had from the start." Angela stared at him, her emotions warring on her face. Finally, she exhaled. "I'll think about it." Adrian nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. Maybe redemption wasn't impossible after all. Adrian left the apartment with the weight of Angela's words pressing down on his chest. The rain had stopped, but the damp air clung to his skin like an uncomfortable truth he could no longer ignore. He had come seeking clarity. What he had found was a past he had conveniently forgotten, a betrayal he had never acknowledged, and a life he had unknowingly dismantled. Angela had not simply left Moretti's Fine Dining. She had been driven out. And worse, he had sealed every door behind her, ensuring she never found her way back into the industry. The thought made him sick. He had always considered himself a visionary, a man who built his empire through hard work and relentless ambition. But if this was true, if he had truly destroyed Angela's career, then what kind of man had he really been? His phone buzzed in his pocket. Gabriella. He hesitated before answering. "Yeah?" "You've been ignoring my calls," Gabriella said, her voice sharp. "You have a board meeting tomorrow. Investors are expecting an expansion proposal." Adrian pinched the bridge of his nose. "Push it back." Silence, then. "Adrian, are you kidding me? You never just push it back, Gabriella," he repeated, his voice firmer. She sighed. "What's going on?" He exhaled slowly. "I found out something about an old employee, a mistake I made." Gabriella's voice softened. "What kind of mistake?" "One I need to fix." Another pause. Then she asked the question he hadn't even dared to ask himself. "At what cost?" Adrian swallowed hard, watching as his reflection in a rain-streaked window stared back at him. Tired, worn, and suddenly unsure of everything he had built. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I need to find out." The following morning, Adrian sat at his desk scrolling through old employee records. Angela's name appeared in an archived file. Her employment dates, her role as a sous chef, her sudden departure. But what caught his attention was a set of confidential notes attached to her file, marked by his former legal advisor. His stomach turned as he read them. "Angela Rivera has potential to be a competitive risk. Strong personality, high creativity. If terminated, ensure professional isolation to prevent industry competition. Adrian's pulse pounded in his ears. He had signed off on this. His own legal team had carried out the blacklisting, and he had never even questioned it. It wasn't just negligence, it was calculated, ruthless, intentional. His hands clenched into fists. He thought of Angela, all those years of struggle, of rejection, of wasted potential. He had never considered what happened to those he left behind. He had only cared about winning. But now, he had lost something far greater than a business deal. He had lost his own humanity. Taking a shaky breath, he reached for his phone. It was time to do what he should have done years ago. He called Angela. The line rang. Once, twice. Then she answered. "What do you want, Adrian?" "I need to see you," he said, his voice firm. "Not as a businessman, not as your former boss, just as a man who made a mistake." Angela hesitated, but then she sighed. "Meet me at La Esquina, tonight at 7. Adrian arrived at La Esquina, a small but cozy cafe tucked into a quiet corner of the city. It was nothing like the extravagant fine dining establishments he owned, but it had warmth, character, and soul. Angela was already there, sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. He approached cautiously. "Thanks for meeting me." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'm still not sure why I did." Adrian slid into the seat across from her, clearing his throat. "Because I owe you more than just an apology." Angela arched an eyebrow. "Go on." He set his phone down, pulling up the confidential notes from her file, turning the screen toward her. Angela's eyes darkened as she read. "What is this?" "My legal team's strategy," Adrian admitted. "To blacklist you, to make sure you never became competition." Angela's hands trembled. She inhaled sharply, the betrayal hitting her all over again. "Till you admit it." "I do," Adrian said, his voice raw. "And I want to make it right." Angela let out a bitter laugh. "How, Adrian? Are you going to give me the last 10 years of my life back?" His jaw tightened. "No, but I can give you the future you should have had." She frowned. Adrian leaned forward. "I want you to be co-head chef at Moretti's Fine Dining. Full creative control. Your name on the menu, your face in every article, everything that was stolen from you, I'll make sure the world knows it was yours all along." Angela stared at him, speechless. "I'll issue a public statement," Adrian continued, "admitting what I did, acknowledging your work. I'll call every food critic, every industry leader, and I'll tell them who you really are." Angela swallowed hard. "And what do you get out of this, Adrian?" He hesitated, then, "Honestly, maybe nothing. Maybe I lose everything." Angela searched his face, looking for deception, but all she saw was a man standing at the edge of his own reckoning. She exhaled slowly. "I'll think about it." Adrian followed through. The next morning, he called a press conference. The cameras rolled, the reporters leaned forward, and Adrian Moretti, the king of fine dining, the untouchable visionary, publicly admitted his greatest failure. "I built my success on the backs of others," he said, his voice steady. "And in doing so, I took credit for work that wasn't mine. I let ambition blind me, and I wronged one of the most talented chefs I have ever worked with." "Angela Rivera." The room exploded with questions. "Are you saying you stole her recipes? Are you stepping down as CEO? What will happen to Moretti's Fine Dining?" Adrian held up a hand. "I am not stepping down," he said firmly. "But I am taking responsibility. Effective immediately, Angela Rivera will join Moretti's Fine Dining as co-head chef with full creative control. Her name will be on the menu. Her work will be recognized, and I will ensure the world knows the truth." The industry erupted. Some called Adrian's confession brave, others called it too little too late. Investors panicked, customers debated whether to boycott or celebrate. But one thing was certain, everything had changed. And Adrian had made powerful enemies. Vincent "Vinny DeLuca," one of his biggest investors, stormed into Adrian's office the next day. What the hell was that? Vinny snapped. Do you have any idea how much money we just lost? Adrian met his glare without flinching. I don't care. Vinny's expression darkened. Oh, but you will. Mark my words, Moretti. You just made the worst mistake of your career. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Adrian exhaled, rubbing his temples. He had just declared war on his own empire, and he had no idea what would happen next. The storm had arrived. Adrian Moretti sat in his office, staring at the swirling headlines flooding every news site, every industry blog, every social media platform. Adrian Moretti admits to career sabotage. Offers former employee high-profile redemption. Moretti's fine dining empire in crisis. Investors pulling out. Culinary king or fraud. The industry reacts to Moretti's shocking confession. Each headline chipped away at the foundation of power he had built over the past 2 decades. His inbox was overflowing with emails from investors, legal advisors, board members, most furious, some cautiously supportive. But the worst message came from Vinny DeLuca. You just signed your own death warrant, Moretti. Enjoy watching everything you built burn. Adrian set his phone down, his jaw tightening. He had known the fallout would be brutal, but he hadn't expected open warfare. His restaurant empire was under siege. His name was being dragged through the mud. But strangely, he didn't feel regret. For the first time in years, he had done the right thing. Still, the cost was only beginning to reveal itself. By the afternoon, Gabriella burst into his office, her face a mask of barely restrained fury. Tell me you have a plan, she demanded, tossing a thick folder onto his desk. Because this, she jabbed a finger at the headlines, this is a goddamn disaster. Adrian leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. It had to be done. Gabriella's laugh was bitter. To be done? Do you have any idea how many investors are threatening to pull out? How many reservations we've lost overnight? People don't like scandal, Adrian. They don't care if you were doing the right thing. They just care about the brand. Adrian exhaled, forcing himself to meet her gaze. Then, let them leave. Gabriella blinked, stunned. You can't be serious. I am. He sat forward, his voice steady. I built this company with my name, but I let greed and ambition corrupt it. If the price of doing the right thing is losing money, then so be it. Gabriella shook her head. You don't understand. Vinny DeLuca isn't just pulling funding. He's actively sabotaging you. He's calling suppliers, telling them to sever contracts. He's reaching out to board members, trying to turn them against you. Adrian's hands tightened into fists. Then we fight back. Gabriella studied him for a long moment, then sighed, rubbing her temples. You really think you can come out of this alive? Adrian let out a humorless chuckle. I don't know, but I have to try. That evening, Adrian stood inside Moretti's fine dining, waiting. The restaurant had emptied earlier than usual. The scandal had scared away some customers, and staff members whispered behind his back, unsure of whether they were witnessing the downfall of a legend or the rebirth of a better man. And then, the doors opened. Angela Rivera stepped inside. She was dressed simply, her auburn hair tied back, her expression guarded. But, despite the wariness in her eyes, she had come. Adrian swallowed the lump in his throat. I wasn't sure you'd show. Angela exhaled, crossing her arms. Neither was I. She glanced around. I see the place is still standing. For now? Adrian smirked despite himself. For now. Angela's gaze hardened. You really followed through. The press statement, the public apology. You actually did it. I told you I would, Adrian said softly. She studied him, her sharp eyes searching for deception. But for the first time in their tangled history, he wasn't lying. All right, Angela said finally. Let's talk terms. They sat in a private dining area, a glass of wine in front of Angela, a whiskey untouched in Adrian's hand. I don't want a token position, Angela said bluntly. I don't want to be your PR stunt. If I take this job, I'm taking it as an equal. Adrian nodded. Co-head chef, full creative control. Angela raised an eyebrow. And the menu? Adrian hesitated, then pushed a folder toward her. Inside were drafts of a new menu, each dish carefully labeled with the original creator. Angela's name was all over it. She flipped through the pages, her fingers hesitating over dishes she hadn't seen in years. The ones she had created, the ones Adrian had once taken as his own. Her throat tightened. "You're giving me credit for everything?" "Yes." His voice was firm. "Because it was always yours." Angela closed the folder, inhaling deeply. "Then I'm in." Adrian's chest loosened, relief washing over him. "Good." She leaned forward, a smirk playing at her lips. "But if you try to undermine me, Moretti, I'll burn this place to the ground." Adrian chuckled. Fair enough. A partnership had been formed, but the war wasn't over yet. 2 days later, Adrian received the call. Gabriella's voice was urgent. "Vinny's making his move." Adrian sat up. "What now?" "He's calling for a vote of no confidence. He's trying to force you out of your own company." Adrian went cold. The investors, the board, the people who had once worshipped him, they were now turning against him. Because Vinny had made sure they saw him as a liability. Because Vinny had made sure they saw him as a liability, the irony wasn't lost on him. All these years, Adrian had believed himself untouchable. Now, he was one meeting away from losing everything. And the worst part? He didn't know if he could stop it. The boardroom was silent as Adrian walked in. 11 members, all powerful figures who had once bet their fortunes on his success, now sat on the other side of the long mahogany table, their expressions unreadable. Vinny DeLuca sat at the head, a smug smile tugging at his lips. "Glad you could make it, Moretti." Adrian ignored him, taking his seat at the opposite end. Vinny folded his hands together. "Let's get right to it. This company has suffered catastrophic losses over the past 2 weeks. Investor confidence is shaken. The media circus around your confession is poisoning the brand. So, we're putting it to a vote." A pause. Then Vinny's smirk widened. "Vote to remove you as CEO." Murmurs rippled through the room. Adrian let out a slow breath. He had expected this, but he wasn't going down without a fight. "I understand why we're here," he said, his voice steady. "But before you cast your votes, I want to remind you what this company stands for." He glanced around the room. For years, Moretti's Fine Dining was built on a lie. It was built on my name, my face, but behind that name were people like Angela Rivera, people who actually created the dishes, the experiences, the soul of this business. He leaned forward. "I confessed because it was the right thing to do. And if you think removing me is going to save you, then you don't understand what's coming, because people don't want corporations built on stolen legacies. They want honesty. They want authenticity. And that's what I'm giving them." Silence. Then, one by one, the votes were cast. It was close, too close. But when the final vote was counted, Adrian Moretti was still CEO. Vinny's smirk faltered. Adrian stood, adjusting his suit. "Looks like I'm staying." Vinny's jaw tightened. "You made a mistake today, Moretti." Adrian smirked. "No, Vinny, I finally fixed one." Vinny stormed out. And Adrian? He turned, heading back to the kitchen, where he truly belonged. The moment Adrian stepped out of the boardroom, he knew the war wasn't over. Winning the vote had secured his position, but it hadn't restored his reputation. He still had to prove, to the world, to Angela, and most importantly, to himself, that he wasn't the man who had built his success on the backs of others, that he could be better. And that meant doing what he should have done years ago, putting the food, the people, and the passion before the power. The first place to start? The kitchen. When Adrian walked into the kitchen at Moretti's Fine Dining that night, he was met with stares. The chefs had seen the headlines, they had watched the scandal unfold, and now they were looking at him differently. For the first time in his career, Adrian felt like an outsider in his own restaurant. Angela was already there, tying her apron. She met his gaze without flinching. "Took you long enough," you had exhaled. "Thought I'd start where I should have all along." Angela snorted. "You? In the kitchen?" She raised an eyebrow. "You do realize I run this place now?" A slow smile tugged at Adrian's lips. "I know." Angela studied him for a long moment, then sighed, tossing him an apron. "Well, then get to work, Moretti. Let's see if you can actually cook." It had been years since Adrian had cooked in a professional kitchen. He had started as a chef back when he was hungry, before the fame, before the empire, but running a business had pulled him away from the craft, and now, as he stood among the chefs, he felt rusty, slow, out of place. Angela didn't cut him any slack. "You're slicing too slow," she snapped, eyeing his uneven cuts of shallots. Adrian gritted his teeth and fixed his form. "You burned the sauce," she pointed out, smirking. Adrian cursed under his breath and started over. By the time the dinner rush hit, he was drenched in sweat, his muscles burning from the pace. And he loved it. Because for the first time in years he was back in the fire, back in the rhythm, back where he belonged. The chefs who had once eyed him warily began to soften, watching as he took criticism, adjusted, and pushed himself, like a rookie chef on his first day. Respect wasn't demanded in the kitchen, it was earned. And Adrian was ready to earn it. A week into the new partnership, Adrian and Angela were putting the final touches on a brand new tasting menu. The press was watching, the customers were waiting, and the industry was holding its breath. But there was a problem. Suppliers had started backing out, thanks to Vinny DeLuca's influence. Ingredients were suddenly unavailable. Shipments were delayed. Angela slammed the fridge door shut. "If I ever see that bastard, I swear." Adrian held up a hand. "I'll handle it." Angela narrowed her eyes. "You better, because if this restaurant goes down because of your old friends, I'll never forgive you." Adrian nodded, already dialing a number. 2 hours later, Adrian sat across from Vinny DeLuca in a dimly lit private lounge at an exclusive club. Vinny smirked, swirling his whiskey. "Moretti, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "You know why I'm here," Adrian said, keeping his voice even. "Call off the suppliers. Stop sabotaging my restaurant." Vinny chuckled. "Oh, Adrian, you don't get it, do you? This is what happens when you cross the people who made you." Adrian clenched his fists. "I made myself." Vinny leaned forward. "And now you're unmaking yourself. The investors don't trust you. The industry sees you as a liability. You're a dead man walking, Moretti." Adrian exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. "We both know you're doing this to send a message. So what do you want, Vinny?" Vinny's smile turned cold. "Simple. Sell me your controlling stake in Moretti's fine dining. Walk away clean. I'll keep the brand alive. You'll keep your dignity." Adrian stared at him. A month ago he might have considered it. A week ago he might have hesitated. But now? Now he saw Moretti's fine dining for what it was. Not a brand, not a business, but a legacy. His answer was simple. "Oh." Vinny's expression darkened. "Then I'll bury you." Adrian stood. "Try." Then he turned and walked out, leaving Vinny seething in his own greed. The next morning, a false scandal hit the press. Rumors spread that Moretti's fine dining was failing, that the new tasting menu was a disaster, that Adrian had lost control of the kitchen. It was a coordinated attack. Reservations plummeted overnight. Angela stormed into his office, slamming a newspaper down on his desk. "This is what happens when you play by the rules," she snapped. "You should have fought dirtier." Adrian looked at the headlines, then met her glare. "I'm not that man anymore." Angela scoffed. "Then you'd better figure out who the hell you are, because right now we're running out of time." With the restaurant on the edge of collapse, Adrian had one final move. He called every top food critic, journalist, and culinary influencer and invited them to a private one-night live dinner experience at Moretti's Fine Dining. No gimmicks, he told Angela. No marketing spin, just us, the food, and the truth. Angela hesitated. If this doesn't work, Adrian smiled. Then we go down swinging. On the night of the event, the restaurant was packed with elite critics, industry legends, and skeptical guests. The tension in the air was thick. Then the plates started going out. Dish after dish, handcrafted by Adrian, Angela, and their team. Raw, passionate, uncompromised flavors. And as the night went on, something shifted. Critics stopped whispering. Influencers started filming. Plates were scraped clean, followed by murmurs of surprise, delight, and awe. By the time dessert was served, there was no doubt the reviews would be spectacular. Angela turned to Adrian, a rare grin breaking across her face. "You crazy bastard, you actually pulled it off." Adrian exhaled, his shoulders finally relaxing. "Not me. Us." And for the first time in years, he knew Moretti's Fine Dining had finally found its true soul. The next morning, the headlines told a new story. Moretti's Fine Dining reinvents itself. A culinary revival. Adrian Moretti and Angela Rivera, a partnership that changed the industry. Redemption served on a plate, the stunning comeback of Moretti's Fine Dining. Investors who had once doubted him now begged to buy back in. Vinny DeLuca, exposed for his sabotage and blacklisted from the industry. And Angela? She stood beside Adrian as his equal, her name now legendary. As Adrian looked around the bustling restaurant that night, listening to the laughter, the clinking glasses, the energy that had been missing for so long, he knew one thing. He had lost his empire, but in its place, he had built something far greater. Adrian Moretti has fought against the odds, against his past, and against the very system he once thrived in, all for the chance to make things right. He has lost power, money, and the loyalty of those who only saw him as a tool for profit, but in return, he has gained something priceless: integrity, redemption, and a renewed purpose. Yet, his journey isn't over. His enemies may be down, but they're not gone. The restaurant industry is brutal, and in the world of fine dining, one mistake can erase everything. So now we turn to you, the audience. What should Adrian do next? Should he expand the restaurant and turn it into a movement, one that fights for fairness and proper recognition in the culinary world? Should he mentor new chefs, ensuring that the next generation never faces the same struggles that Angela endured? Should he face Vinny DeLuca one last time, taking the fight beyond the restaurant and exposing the corruption that nearly destroyed him? Or should he leave it all behind, stepping away from fine dining and starting fresh, proving that success isn't about power, but about passion?